Hi guys, welcome back for the second installment of Keep Ups with Canadian Women's Soccer. So, I was going to start off talking about the current Canadian national team, but I was talking with someone the other day and I discovered they didn't know a lot about where soccer for women even started or how it's developed, and the fact that there was a 50-year period where women's soccer was banned. So, yeah. So I decided to go into the history of what international women's soccer and also the history of Canadian women's soccer. So I'm going to split that into two videos. So today we'll talk about international women's soccer in general, and next time we'll dive down a little deeper before we look at the current status of Canadian women's soccer. So, there's reports that women's soccer started like way back in the day and it's kind of hard to keep track of, but the first actual recorded events were in the 1790s. There was an annual match that would occur in Scotland, and then the first official women's game recorded was in 1892, also in Scotland, and then a few years later they had one in 1895 in England. So it looked like women's soccer was progressing a little bit. It became more popular during the First World War, and then around 1921 it was really picking up. There was a club called Dick Kerr's Women's Football Club, and they were huge. I wouldn't be surprised if you have heard of them. And they got fans to their games, around like 50,000 people. And we're like, heck yeah, go women, badass. But that was not the attitude back then. And so I don't know if like men felt threatened or what was up, but basically the Football Association banned women's soccer at that point. And so there was a 50-year period where no women's soccer occurred, and obviously that's a big shame, and it really hurt the progress of soccer for females and where we are at now. And so we're lucky that around the 1970s, Italy hosted this international tournament, and it was really successful. And again, next year they tried one in Mexico. Again, went really well, and so it was starting to look good for maybe that women's football would be successful and would make another appearance. Around the same time, so 1981, Brown University in America had their first official undergraduate team, their varsity team, and so they hosted a couple tournaments, and you started to see the women's game develop a lot more in America from then on. And obviously, like the NCAA Division One is known for the many American talents, but also the internationals that they draw in, not only the Canadian players, but people from Europe and wherever. So that was a huge progress for the women's game and growing youth players. And then, so it started to take off more in professional aspects in 1988. China hosted this international event for 12 teams, including Canada, and they went and they saw there was a lot of success with it, and they're like, heck yeah, this looks great, so let's do a World Cup. And so in 1991, they did the first official Women's World Cup. Unfortunately, Canada did not make the cut because only one team from CONCACAF could go, and US beat Canada, so but it was a great tournament and they saw a lot of success. And so they were like, hey, yeah, let's keep doing these Women's World Cups. And then in 1995, they had one and it went well. And 1996, they decided to have the first Olympics for women's soccer. And so that has also been a success moving forward. The men's side had always been a bit more restrained due to professional levels and age, but because there wasn't really a professional level for women even then, it was like any females from the country could play. So it was great to see, and so we saw that that went well. And 1999 is probably where women's soccer really started to take off. I don't know if any of you guys have seen that infamous video where Brandi Chastain scores the winning penalty kick for the Team USA in the finals, and they're hosting. And so she takes off her shirt and she celebrates like crazy, and it's pretty iconic for young females like myself growing up and watching that. I mean, like, that is a badass woman. So watching that, it was just crazy, and there were 90,185 people who saw that moment live, and the audience, like, that number is crazy considering there was like a decade of women's soccer at that point that was actually like developing. And so I think around the 2000 is when women's soccer really started to take off. As you can see, So there were a couple different tournaments, and they tried a couple different leagues at that point, and nothing seemed to be sticking until 2012 when the NWSL arrived, and this was monumentous for American players. They had been performing on the international stage. Finally, they found a more stable environment, and Canadian players also went there to play, typically. And so Canadians Americans 2012, also the stage for the semifinals in the London Olympics, where Canada lost 4-3. Questionable game, and it created a lot of momentum here in Canada. And so, though we didn't win, we got bronze, which is still great. And FIFA also did a couple other things that year. They approved the wearing of hijabs. They kind of progressed the game a little bit. And then in 2015, Canada got to host the Women's World Cup, though internationally it wasn't really looked upon as a success. When you go to these culturally soccer places like France, who did a much better job following, or like Sweden, Netherlands, they live and breathe soccer, and so Canada was kind of criticized because fans, the turnout in the media towards it weren't as good as expected. So it went relatively well, and there was a great turnout, but there was more to be done. And so 2019, the France World Cup followed that up with a bang. Media coverage was much better. The television, the quality of play. There were new teams in the fight. It was a lot better to watch, and a lot more enjoyable. And so over 1.12 billion people worldwide watched that Women's World Cup, and it was considered a like a huge success, actually. And perhaps one of the most interesting storylines about that was the U.S. women's soccer team, because they were fighting for equal play, and it was very publicized. It was going through a lawsuit, and they had to back up their talk, and so they went on and they won big games. They made a big statement at the beginning, and then they won their fourth World Cup. And though they did get approved better, like they're supposed to get better conditions, like the men's team, they still aren't getting equal pay. And as of right now, only 7 countries in the world have said that they are implementing it. Brazil and England recently joined. Australia, Fiji, Finland, New Zealand, and Norway have not heard anything on the Canadian front really about that. So it kind of leaves us at the fact that women's soccer was pretty good, had a 50-year gap where they really fell behind the men's team because, you know, the men banned women's soccer from happening. And then in FIFA, and then they were like, okay, yeah, go let your countries figure out how to develop women's soccer. And so it's done a pretty good job since. Like, they've been gaining a lot of momentum. And though the quality improves, the pay, the media coverage, the television, the opportunities are less than satisfactory. So we've learned a lot about women's soccer in the past, but we also have a lot to do going forward. And I hope you learned a little bit about this history and how it impacts us now. And let me know if you have any comments, questions, and I will spend my next video talking more about Canadian women's soccer and their history and their impact. So comment, like, subscribe, follow, and share with everyone you know. All right.